I'll try again. Welcome to the CEO series. Today, our guest is Brad Boyson, who's the co-founder of HR Learning, and he's the former executive director for SHRM in the Middle East. HR Learning is a mentor-to-mentee networking and development platform. He spent 7 years previously as the executive director for SHRM Middle East, based here in Dubai. He has a wealth of experience, CHRO roles from Mitsubishi, Royal Caribbean International, Emirates, Hamptons here in Dubai. He's a published author of Global HR Economics, active participant in the development of ISO TC 260 HR standards. So we are very lucky to have him here today. Brad, welcome.
Thank you, Ron. It's good to see you. I love your intro. You reminded me of, how Emirates Airlines here does to get the radio announcers to come in halfway through. I mean, that's very sophisticated. Good on you. Good on you.
Yeah.
All planned.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I needed that with the mess ups I do when I try and do this from time to time. But thank you so much. We have so much to talk about. So let the audience know about HR Learning. Let's talk about that first, because our topic is going to be the upskilling of the competency model for HR executives. So talk to us about HR Learning and what you're trying to accomplish there.
Sure, happy to. Thank you, Ron. And thank you for the opportunity. Well, I think like a lot of people a year ago, just over a year ago, I left my previous employer and moved into the consulting space. And just prior to COVID, my partner and I were sort of thinking, what's missing in the marketplace? What's the opportunity that isn't being leveraged, especially from the point of view of consultants like we are and were. And the thing that we noticed was that, especially in this day and age of technology, a lot of people, a lot of organizations are treating work relationships sort of like a job board. They did like LinkedIn. You put it up there and you build it and you hope they will come. Yet, let me ask you, Ron, I mean, where do most people get their jobs from over their career?
Well, one of the things I've found has always worked for me is through connections, building relationships with people. Yeah,
exactly. And, the numbers support that. So here we are in a day and age of technology, posting and hoping, that build it and people will come. And we said, what can we do in the consulting space that works more like how most people get majority of their jobs, not all of their jobs? And that's referrals. So you can put up a referral website, or you can actually create relationships in the consulting space. In the consulting space, specifically, we targeted mentors to mentees, because we have a lot of people like you do in your network that are amazing at what they do, but maybe they're not the best at self-promotion. Maybe they're not the gurus that show up on those top 100 influencer lists. Yet these people are the ones that are really doing the work. So we decided to create sort of a boutique LinkedIn whereby on the two sides of the equations, the mentor, we asked that they donate some of their wisdom as an introduction.
Yes.
And on the mentee side, we said, let's put some skin in the game. We're not just going to have a webinar where you watch it like in the background and a television show. We're going to give you assessments at the end of it. If you want credit for attending our programs, we're going to give you, it's not going to be, an LSAT, but it's going to at least demonstrate that you learned, you took something away. And that was sort of the supply and demand side of the equation. We've won through 2 cycles of this so far, and I'm very proud to say that many of the speakers that we've had on have actually gained business opportunities because of that. So that's sort of the genesis and the seed, and we're going to start our round 3 just after Ramadan here in the Middle East.
Okay. So, and talking about people not being aware of the marketing side of finding a job. So that kind of ventures into branding, which is important. We don't normally, lots of people get upset when you mention themselves as a brand. But I said, when somebody sees you coming, they see a brand. They know that they see and pick up certain things about you. So your program is also kind of a branding tool, or giving people insights as to how to brand themselves on the market in their careers?
Absolutely. We're sort of putting our skin in the game by introducing people to our community. It's a continuous learning community, and that's the mindset. So Fahad and I are introducing people we know that can add value to other people's networks. And it doesn't necessarily have to be commercial. It can be just in that classic networking sense. And that when you give people the opportunity to present what they're good at, much like when you presented, we said, you decide the agenda. What is it that you want to tell people that you know needs to be heard that isn't out there? And when you give people that sort of opportunity, they usually thrive. They usually come out of their shell and they really put their best foot forward. So that was the idea behind helping people brand themselves. And you know, people who are good self-promoters, they don't need our help. They can do their thing. They can get on these lists. We really want to focus on the qualitative aspect of the relationship of knowledge sharing. It is a CSR project in its introduction, because that's how we want to present it. Let's give first, and then if in the future something's meant to be on the commercial side, so be it.
Okay, so let's take it a different way. Let's take it from the position of the mentor, because our topic is the upskilling of the competency model for HR executives. And I always use, in every intervention I have for strategic HR, I walk through that competency model. And based on the SHRM model, there's only one piece in there that basically centers around HR skill and expertise. So give us some insights from your side as to what you're seeing as it relates to this upskilling piece for our executives.
Well, I guess I'd start by saying there's a lot of models of HR out there, you know, and I'm not here to put forward any one as definitively the other. And at the end of the day, they should all have a lot in common, because they're talking about the same thing. But, you know, if I look back on things, and I think as a profession, if there's maybe a mistake, if I can call it that, that we've made is even this word competencies, you know, and I'm not in the policy police of language, you know, and I'm not someone who really dives deep into the semantics of words. But when you look specifically at the idea of competence, let's be honest, we're really talking about an individual's, and one of the definitions is knowledge, skills, and abilities, right? And yet, Ron, when you talk, you are often talking about, you know, how are you adding value to the organization? You know, what is your business radar? How are you enabling others to perform better? And that's often not included in the classic traditional competency model. You're basically saying, what am I competent at? I can do this and that. Think of it in terms of language. You can know a language, you can write a language, you can read a language, you can speak a language. But when we're talking about professionals, we actually want the professional to enable others to raise their performance, not the individual. So I'm sort of prefacing your question by saying that I think what we need to be focusing more on, rather than competencies for executives or otherwise, is what are the models that are designed to encourage behaviors and performance that enables the organization, that enables your team, that enables the business to perform better. And I think the good thing is I think there's a pivot taking place right now in the world towards that type of model.
Okay. So if you had to think of a key skill and ability of an upcoming, say, strategically focused HR, could you name one or two that would be at the top of your scale? I know I have mine, but would you name one or two from your side?
I'm gonna start with one that I've had for a long time that I don't think gets enough attention, and people might not look like the anchor word that I use, but you know, put it in the context to which I am putting it. So it's not just the executives or leaders or the CHROs. The competency, Ron, is maturity. Okay. I have never seen an HR competency model that explicitly calls out maturity. And I'm not talking about age. I'm not talking about laps around the sun.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about quantitative experience. You know, there are 20-year-olds with the maturity of most 50-year-olds, and there are 50-year-olds with the maturity of a teenager.
I know some of those.
We all do. We all do. And so I think in the competency modeling side of things, I think one of the sub-elements that's really been missing over the years is maturity. And here's an interesting sort of throwback. I go back to, you know, someone that most of us know in HR, not necessarily personally, maybe Ron, you do, is Jack Welch. You know, Jack Welch had a very famous definition of, you know, what is it that it takes to be, and it was very simple, you know, very, in a Jack Welch way, very classically simple. He had this expression of parent pastor, right? He said, you know, you need to be some part parent sometimes, you need to be, and I don't know that the wording was appropriate at that time.
Yeah.
But when you think about it in terms of what we mean by a parent, that's where this maturity side comes in it. You know, you can't be the office gossip and be effective at HR at any level. And yet, you know, Ron, where does a competency model that you've seen say you need to be competent in workplace politics?
Yeah.
My goodness, isn't that fundamental as fundamental get? We talk about business, you know, acumen and other sort of ways of describing it. But man, if you're not competent in office politics, whether that's a subset of maturity, I don't know.
Yeah.
The second one, Ron, which is maybe more towards what people might expect in this day and age, is people analytics.
Okay.
I really think that, and I'm not here to sort of say, you know, AI, machine learning is the be all to end all of this domain. In fact, I think just the contrary. I have an expression that if something can be automated in HR, it was never HR in the first place. And that a lot of people hear that and go, well, that's not the HR I know. And I'm like, yeah, that's right, because that's the HR you've experienced or enabled. You need to be enabling the HR that lives exactly what I said, and that's agile and adapts and adds strategic value. So the people analytics side, Ron, is the one I think that is really going to emerge big in the foreseeable future.
Okay. I'm doing an analytics course next week. Based on the same thing, evidence-based. Well, you know, I want to go back to navigation. I call it navigating the thicket, thicket inside of the organization. So you talk about maturity. And I did a session today on change management, and we were talking about influencing skills, which is what I'm big on, because if you're at that level, how do you influence the person in front of you? How do you influence that C-suite? What skills do you have to be able to do that?
Yeah.
So my giveaway to them is always keep your radar up to find out who's approachable and who's not approachable. Why not? It's kind of doing a stakeholder analysis to understand who am I in front of or who's important to make this work. And that comes back to exactly what you were talking about, the maturity to be able to do that. I had a young lady that we interviewed, you know, Hessa. She's the head of HR for one of the governmental agencies here.
Yes.
And she talked about her first time that she presented to the board and could not sleep the night before, you know, of having that maturity to, after she did it, confidence built up and she was able to move beyond that. Now she doesn't give it a thought. So is there a journey in that process of having that maturity?
Well, there's no substitute for experience. You know, and what you dig into to get your confidence, you know, is unique to the individual. One of the things that's given me confidence in what I do now is I've worked all over the world. And the reason that gives me confidence is because on the cultural side, on the emotional intelligence side, which is so important in HR, I really feel comfortable. And I don't mean that in sort of a complacent way. I mean, I get it. I've worked in Japanese cultures. Obviously, Ron, you and I were in the middle of the Middle East. Yeah. And, you know, when you look at the spectrum of different cultures, these cultures can occur anywhere today, especially in the virtual world. So this idea that there's sort of a global mindset, I actually don't like that expression because global's everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere is global right now. So it's a bit even redundant to use the word global. So when you look at specifically on the, cultural intelligence, emotional intelligence, that gave me a lot of confidence, so that when I went into different situations, I didn't just present myself as this sort of West Coast Canadian guy, the business schooling, and I could adapt to the situation.
Right?
Yeah. Right? Yeah. And I go back many years, learning these, from experience. I remember when I first started to interview people from different cultures, and that sort of, if you will, British legacy of Canadian culture, a bit more conservative, a bit more linear, logical. I would interview people from Hispanic cultures and a bit more emotive cultures, and I would go, that interview didn't go very well. Yeah. And I would sit back and say, why? Was it the candidate or was it me? And I realized that, this sort of structured interview process that we teach from sort of a Western cultural perspective doesn't work for all cultures. So I'm going to adjust my style based on whoever I'm interacting with. And that's sort of, one small example, Ron, of all the different little experiences that I've accumulated that's really taught me to adjust to your audience in every sense of the word.
Yeah. Well, a key point that you mentioned there, that you thought about the interview after the interview, self-awareness says that, how did that go? I don't think it went well. What can I do next time? But what I shudder to think is that the interviews that would happen, and the onus is on the interviewee, and they didn't come through well. So if any recruiters are there, sometimes you've got to back out of a situation and try and analyze it. And don't always assume that you had everything on point and they were not responding to you a certain way as related to culture. Because one of the things in your bio I always find interesting when I read it, overseeing a single workforce of 80 different nationalities. So like putting on a different hat.
Well, let me tell you, I don't want to step over you on this, but I came to Dubai in 2008 and I interviewed with Emaar. We all know Emaar in this region, right? And I ended up working there for 4 years. And one of the questions that I got asked in the interview was, we have over 60 different nationalities here. How are you with different cultures? And my answer was, I just came from an organization where I was working with over 80. So I'll do my best. I'll do my best, right? And that's just part of me. People who know me know that that's part of my curious nature is, when you really study cultures and you look at sort of North American, Canadian, British sort of, what are the opposites of that? You get into the Japanese and Arab culture. And here I am living, in Dubai, in the UAE, working with Arabs and other nationalities in this diverse workforce that we have here, which is just an unbelievable challenge and opportunity. I love it. I'm sure it's part of the reason you're here too.
Yeah, it is interesting work and interesting in understanding other people's side of the proverbial equation. For HR people that are inside of an organization and they're looking to equip themselves with different skills, what advice would you give them? So we had the theoretical conversation around competencies. What advice would you give them if you were talking to a room full of college students or a room full of first year, second year HR people in an organization? How do they keep that journey going alive, learning journey?
Well, and again, sometimes I'm a bit atypically Canadian and I'm blunt. If you're moving into HR because you're a people person and you're bad with numbers, don't go there. Don't go there. Ron, one of the expressions I use to challenge people who present that kind of framework is, you could convert every single number to a word. You have the number 1, you can spell it O-N-E. So if you have trouble with numbers, just convert all of these numbers into words and sentences. Then if you tell me you have trouble with numbers, I'm going to challenge you on that, because it's not about the numbers. It's the fact that you're not comfortable being accountable in an objective way. And to do HR, that's so important. We talk about all the biases in workplaces, the office politics, And part of being the compass of as the head of HR is you need to present not just a facade, but the roots of the tree that is objectivity and approachability. You need to have those two elements. And again, calling back to Jack's world, the parent pastor type is at the foundation of being approachable, trustworthy, authentic, these types of things.
So in this discussion of reimagining the workplace, reimagining the workforce, what role do you see from your vantage point that HR should be playing in this equation?
Well, I build it upon the expression that I said before. There's going to be activities in HR that are going to go away. They're going to disappear. And a lot of people have invested in those activities as if they're HR. As I say to them, that's not HR. That's never was HR. That's not why I got into HR, strategically value added, having to understand the organization from a holistic point of view. So I foresee, and I haven't actually articulated this before in different forums, but I really think that we're going to see, Ron, an emergence of a new type of practitioner. That if you think of sort of the circles of a Venn diagram, the overlap, if you take HR and finance and you overlap them and you put, and I don't know the right word that's going to emerge, I think the dominant candidate is human capital. And I know a lot of organizations for a long time have already had human capital this, human people operations this, but if you just change titles and nothing changes in the way you operate, it's semantics. And I can't think of a better example, Ron, than the HR business partner, right? Yesterday I was an HR manager, today I'm an
You took the words out of my mouth because I just made it know that I was going to bring that up.
Oh man. And so when you talk about what is that intersection of HR and finance, it is being a numbers person, and I don't know any, Ron, I don't know any person who says that they don't like numbers, that when their pay was wrong, that they didn't catch that. You know what I mean? Like the hypocrisy of that. And your workforce wants you to be good at numbers. So, but it's the human side. At the end of the day, the blood that flows through our profession is that humanity part of it. And it's a lot to ask. It's a lot to ask a person to be empathetic and yet objective, but yet that's what is emerging in my mind, is this overlap of HR and finance. And I do sincerely believe that one of the catalysts to that is the emerging outcomes and output of the ISO HR standards, the 30,000 series that's emerging. We are creating and for the finance people out there, they know our GAP, our generally accepted HR principles, our IFRS. When you talk about what are the generally accepted foundations of HR, Ron, it's a philosophical debate, right? And if we can't agree upon our own professional terms and conditions, imagine what finance says. When you say our workforce, our people are the most important asset, and the people in finance are going, you sure you want that definition? I don't think that's what you really mean, but if you want to pretend that you know what you're talking about, okay, the organization owns and controls your workforce. Really, that's the progressive side of HR. So we have to come up with this as practice. It's like it's staking your territory. It's it's like the founding of the United States. You have to stake your declaration as a profession, and HR has never done that. HR is, are we a management function or are we a profession? And people call us professionals, but then they treat us as if we're functional experts.
Yeah, you took the word out of my mouth on the HRBP, because that's a brand that's pretty much dead. I mean, they give it to people and they never give them the real the skills that's needed to carry that out. So one of the things that I find interesting, you said HR and then you said finance. So I tend to want to add another to that, because I talk through from the same CX experience, customer experience, to the employee experience. And marketing people are kind of centered around that entire customer segmentation. So adding a little of that too into that so-called equation of building out this new, whatever you want to call them, whatever letters you want to brand them as this new kind of function. Because I think the marketing role plays a huge role in understanding the 1,500 people work there, the same as they understand the 1,000 customers you have. Any thoughts on from the marketing side?
Well, I have a couple thoughts, but most is just general agreement with what you're saying. And then actually to come full circle, one of the terms that I'm trying to promote, and I'm certainly not, the source of it, is replacing using employee experience with workforce experience, because a lot of our workforce aren't employees today. And when you talk about a strategic marketing strategy, you need to be more inclusive. And so I know that employee experience is the dominant vernacular out there right now, but this is an example where in something like ISO HR standards, we're going to define it as a workforce experience. And, sometimes, SHRM's a great example. There was an effort many years ago to say SHRM, right? I don't know if you remember this, Ron, back in the States, is the CEO at the time was saying, we got to quit calling it SHRM. No one knows what SHRM is. And they said, we are SHRM, because you hear the HR, but the market spoke. And at the end of the day, that project was abandoned. Yeah.
So from your side, and you are in the C-suite quite often, what are you hearing as the major challenges that the executive suite is having as it relates to people, and if we cascade it down one other notch, and their HR department?
Better intel, information that provides value to decision making. And, you think about the COVID crisis, some people would say these types of things aren't predictable. Yet at the same time, crises are predictable in the sense that they will happen. It's not if, it's a question of when. And so we're in a time right now where organizations that were better prepared in terms of risk management, crisis management, business continuity, some of them are actually benefiting in these challenging times. And others that are still waiting, 1 year on for things to go back to, the old days. So I would say business intelligence that's credible is sort of the number one that I hear. And coming from HR in particular, it's don't tell me your opinion. You mentioned the word before. Give me some substance. Give me some evidence to what you're basing your opinion on, because everyone has opinion. There's that great expression from his name escapes me, one of the Silicon Valley VCs many years ago. He said, if you've got an opinion, I'm the CEO. We'll go with mine. If you've got data and facts, I'm going to listen to you. Okay.
Yeah. And that's where the analytics piece comes in, and creating kind of an evidence-based approach. But one of the things I've found, because I do a lot of basic analytic classes, not a statistician at all, and I find that people are afraid to get caught up in that. They're afraid to have that conversation. But one of the key points I talk to is that your job is not maybe to do regression analysis. Your job is to understand the concept. And maybe you have statisticians there that are doing it, and you're the storyteller, as opposed to because if you want to be the statistician, that's not this class, and that's not this learning. So maybe you need to do something else to do that, but you're going to have to choose one way or the other. Be the storyteller and be able to walk them through that. Good point.
Oh, it's so true. You go back to what are the competencies or capabilities of effective HR people. I think that is one of the aspirational ones, is to, the numbers themselves are already there. You have to give them meaning. You have to give them life. You have to bring them into the purpose. And I think one of the challenges that we will all face with sort of people analytics, business data analytics, is that to really have value that lasts, it's like with technology and cable, or, the old television coax. It's easy to get the network out everywhere. Yeah. It's that last inch, that last few centimeters that is the unique part of it. When you talk about analytics. That last piece is going to be unique to every organization. So if people come into this numbers and data world and say, just give me the formulas, lessons in finance, you tell me your debt to equity, you tell me your cash flow, that's not going to tell me anything.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why, I don't know if you know, Ron, like in the US right now, the SEC has actually made human capital reporting mandatory. And they're leaning on the ISO standard as one of the standards. And I was fortunate enough to see the human capital reporting report from Bank of America. And now, I think about how the financial reports and different sort of annual reports that I've seen over the years, how they place HR, right? It's like a line, it's a footnote, it's a, it's a feel-good slogan. Ron, after this, I'm going to send you this Bank of America Human Capital report, and it's just going to make you feel good about HR, because you feel like you're talking the value add, the science, and all of these inclusion and diversity, and all of these substantive issues that we as HR have been working for years, profiled at that level of decision making to the key stakeholders. Wow, that's exciting. It is to me anyway.
Yeah, but so I'm glad you mentioned that, because I said, in the so-called proverbial future, and everybody's in that conference room and everybody has to give a presentation on post-COVID strategy, whatever it is. Finance is coming in with numbers and talking it through. IT is coming through with numbers and talking it through. And then HR is next. I said, so what are you going to talk about? And get away from what you think, but give us some meat to that and talk us through from that vantage point. A young lady reached out to me the other day in a panic, and she says, oh my God, my leadership team just asked me to do a relationship between EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax, and deduction. If people don't know what that is, give me a relationship between EBITDA and employees. And I said, why do they want to know that? I said, but it's divide full-time employees that you have, and you can start from there. But you're going to have to go back in a period of time. What was it the prior year and the prior year to that? Because the finance people talk through trends. If you just give them the EBITDA employee ratio, you're going to have a summary number. Talk them through the value and what value that's brought over the past 3 years, a cycle of whatever it is. So when I get a question like that, I'm like, oh, well, we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
A lot of work to do.
Yeah, it's I have a perverse background working in HR. I didn't fall into it, Ron, and I went to business school. And so one of those is unique alone. You put the two together and I'm an outlier. And think about that. That kind of background in human resources is actually an outlier. But what studying finance taught me as an HR professional first is the concept in an objective way of adding value. Whether you look at it from an economics point of view of, marginal returns, or from a finance point of view of net present value or IRR or something like that, you develop the muscle in your brain that analyzes things from a resource point of view. If we allocate these resources to this particular project or activity, what is our return? And some people, they hate that type of talk when it comes to HR. Yeah. But at the end of the day, if you're not thinking of it as sort of a risk return, a cost benefit mindset, you're not able to create the resources or the surplus to invest in your workforce or invest in people's total rewards and these types of things. So that foundation of finance is actually, and I do know a few competency models that really do have finance as a pillar. But to your point, it's not just about the numbers. It's about the ability the business intelligence to interpret those numbers and create a narrative that influences other people in a mutually beneficial way. And so, and I think the best HR people have been doing that for decades already. They don't need a certification or a model to tell them to do that. But they're so busy being successful in what they do, they don't necessarily get the profile or the template. I've often said to different stakeholders, you know, until you see good HR, you don't know what good HR is. And that's really unfortunate. But when you see it, you know it, and it forever changes your frame of reference as to what HR can be.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that, because the fact that I think back during my career, I worked for an HR leader that was the absolute worst. And I said, if I do anything, I'll do the exact opposite of everything this person did. And that's how I was able to build up my skills around that. So the other key point that you mentioned was, we were having the financial discussion, I did a project in Zurich, December and January, for a major bank based out of Zurich. And one of the things we talked about in strategic workforce planning, cost versus investment, walking through each one of those. Manage a portfolio of employees. You invest in this group would bring a higher return over the other. And it was a conversation we had. And because you had bankers in the room and you had people that were financially literate, everyone understood that. And they understood the role that strategic workforce planning could play in investing in that segment, because the highest return was going to come from that segment. So that was cool with the way that you brought that up. But here's the downside to that. I tend to ask people whenever I do these sessions, how many of you follow the business news? You don't need to have an MBA. Do you read the business section of the newspaper? What does the headline say? What is the workforce implications under that? And I get kind of the HR look. The HR look is that blank look that says, never gave any thought to that. But meanwhile, you may spend a lot of time on social media. What business periodicals are you using? Are you following the major research firms and see what they're putting out? So a lot of this, I would say, and see whether you agree with me on this, is self-taught.
Yes.
We can go to YouTube and understand IRR, as you mentioned, or what was the other one? Net present value, which are financial terms. And I can get a primer in 15 minutes and I get a general concept of it. So I say that to say, should we own part of this? If we know that we're lacking in certain skills and our budget says that you can take one class a year, you can come to your organization and you can upskill them for one time a year, or you can maybe do a session, HR Learn-In, LinkedIn Learning, YouTube University, or whatever it would be. Ownership on developing.
Well, I'm a firm believer in self-selection, and again, I go back to my academic studies where I learned the economic concept of signaling theory. Is that you talk about branding and marketing, you talk about how do we as HR get the best talent for our organizations. Well, we can leverage all these technological tools and show up to work the next day and have 3,000 applications in our inbox. Or we can strategically think, wow, how do I connect with the type of people that I want to hire? Yeah. Why don't I, put something in it that adds a little skin in the game? And, that can be everything from asking the applicant to answer a question. You and I are having a dialogue right now that's exploring different ideas. And there's just so many little tools that you can introduce from a marketing point of view into your HR that are designed to help you, be more effective in these types of areas. So you talked about, the nature of the individual and, do they need sort of the self-discipline, self-motivation? I've told a few people the story. When I was a teenager, late teens, I subscribed to the Harvard Business Review, right? Okay. And then I went back to school at the age of 20. My friends were like 2 years ahead of me. And Ron, I can't tell you how many times I got in trouble in my exams because I was reading an up-to-date journal, and I would reference Peter Drucker. And yet the TA from the professor of the business school who wrote the textbook marked my exam wrong. Because, based on the published date of that particular book in 1960 something, I didn't answer the right question. And I made a very deliberate choice at that time. I said, I can conform or I can do what's right. you know, and I said, you know what, I'm going to keep with the Harvard Business Review.
Yeah.
And to your point, that I think, you know, when you look at sort of what talent is and the type of people that better organizations want, and it's not for every role, let's be honest, you don't want a team full of superstars for every role. You know, that's not an effective team. You want a team full of complements. And sometimes that requires, you know, whether it's diversity or some other attribute. But definitely at the core, you know, in today's world, in almost every type of organization, you need self-starters, you need self-motivated people that are going to have that radar to look into the future, help articulate, you know, the strategy and the plan for the organization. And then, you know, in the sort of full stack concept, ideally motivate them, inspire them, you know. That type of person is very rare. But I think when we talk about, you know, leadership, we have every right to ask for the ideal. You know, circumstances will be different. And so the one leader in one situation won't necessarily be the right leader for another situation. But my goodness, things change so quickly in our times, and they're only going to get faster. And if you don't have an agile, inspirational leader right now in your organization, I'd be short selling.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I love your story about the Harvard Business Review. You know, and that's one of the that I tell people, sign up for it. They have a free membership. You get executive summary. You get a different level of thinking. But I laughed when you said that, because I grew up in a small town in South Carolina, and when the newspaper would come in, the normal newspaper, I always wanted the business section, even as a kid, and I scanned through. I didn't know half of what I was reading, but I'd take the dictionary or the World Book, encyclopedia, and go through and try and figure out what that was. When I went away to college, I found a newsstand that sold the Wall Street Journal. I made a deal with the guy on the papers that are left that nobody purchases. Can I come in on Friday or Saturday when I get some money and buy those? And I'd bring those back to my room and I'd read through them. Now, translating, coming into human resources, I never wanted to be seen as a human resources person. I wanted to be seen as a business person, but my specialty was human resources. So that was kind of the branding I always sought. And I felt comfortable talking with the CFO. I felt comfortable talking with the chief marketing officer. It wasn't a big stretch. And I just took that learning and kind of translated it. So thank you for that point.
I mean, I get that. I just think, I personally, you know, if someone tries to label me, you know, you're HR, and define what that means, I reject the label, because inherent in that is a business person. And, you know, to counter your example with just another example, one of my first business school studies, one of the exams we had, and it must have been in finance, the question was, what did the Dow Jones Industrial Average close at yesterday, right? So this is an exam in an academic environment. And I think it was one of two people out of maybe 200 that got it right. And I refer to that example today because when I have my HR students, to your point, Ron, about staying on top of business and economics and politics and all these factors that influence the work environment, that is fair. Because I've told that story to people and they go, that's not fair. And I said, I'm a finance major. That is as fair as it gets. If you're not in the wrong place at the wrong time, you know, that's the type of thing you should be doing. And we have some of that in our HR space, but I am shocked, probably a lot like you, when I go into different groups of HR people and you ask about their awareness of the broader ecosystem. And when I say HR, I mean business. I consider them one and the same. I'm often shocked as to how narrow their mindsets are. And, you know, I take it as a challenge. Let's expand that mindset.
Yeah, you know, you're taking effect so many. When you told the story of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, my brother, who was an MBA at Columbia University in New York City back in the 70s, my older brother, he told me that when Dow Jones Industrial Average came up in the class they were in, and they asked who knew what Dow Jones was, and one guy said, he asked whether he was a baseball player, because he had no reference point. He thought he was talking about somebody in sports, you know. In talking about that. So let me, as we begin the process of closing out, can you give us the greatest insights that you've gained from the HR Learn-In project? And the other part of that are that people that are online that maybe want to participate, how could that be done?
Yeah, let me start with the latter maybe then. hrlearnin.com. hrlearnin1word.com is our landing page, and encourage people to just, explore, see what we're doing, and get to know us better. And we do have what we call our knowledge session starting again here. It's still another month and a half, but we do look for recommendations too in terms of speakers, and that's our landing page. But in terms of looking forward and sort of where people in different situations should be staying on top of things, I would challenge people who work in HR to really, and COVID, for better or worse, Ron, is a really challenging time for that, because some people are rising, and whatever their position is, they're rising to the occasion. And others are finding that, when I have to work from home and I don't have someone over my shoulder all the time monitoring me, I'm not self-motivated. So I encourage those people who right now in working in HR see how imperative our roles in organizations are in terms of mental health and in terms of managing in the middle, to rise to the occasion, to see yourself as a leader, not just a functional expert. And a lot of people, Ron, who'd be in HR roles right now, they've never seen themselves as leaders, and then this comes along. And I love one of the conferences, I think you did last year as well, virtually, where we were in the group and the CHRO said, we're finding some talent that we never saw before, because they are, they have the skin in the game. They are part of it, and they are asking, how can I help? And when that reference is into the organization's culture in a holistic way, my goodness, are those the people that we need to be able to find, in for lack of a better word, normal times? That's the talent that we want to find, that we want to target, invest in, and give opportunities, as future leaders.
Okay. Your website again is hrlearnin.com, is that it?
hrlearnin1word.com. And it's it's a mixed bag of sort of knowledge sharing. We do have our video archives there as well of our past speakers, yourself obviously included. And we're looking at sort of ways to add to the knowledge sharing that we do, because we, the tagline, Ron, that we use, is tune in, skill up, and pay it forward. And we sincerely live by those values. That's the mission statement of the organization.
Okay. Brad Boyson, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ron. Always a pleasure to connect with you.
Always a pleasure to connect, and it was an honor to have you here with us today. Thank you so much.
And thank you for what you're doing. I mean, you've got an amazing group of people that you're sharing with around the world, and please keep doing what you're doing.
We'll try. Thank you, man. Thank you.
All right.
I'll be in touch. Okay.
All right.
Hang on. Okay.